Hello everyone. As we felt the need of accurate and complete tutorials for MacBook repairing,
آموزش کامل و جامع برای تعمیرات لپتاپ شرکت اپل احساس می‌شد.
and as our members in dr-bios.com have requested for them,
دکتر بایوس داشتم.
we decided to work on these series as well,
تلاش کنیم این قسمت رو هم بهش
and hope they draw your attention.
امیدوار باشیم که همکاران و دوستان عزیز از سایت دکتر بایوس رضایت خاطرشون جلب بشه.
I am Hossein Asadollahi,
حسین اسداللهی هستم.
from technical team of dr-bios.com. After a long absence, I've come back to be at your service, and I'll try to prefer the practical usage over the academic aspect in all my videos.
جنبه کاربردی بودن رو به آکادمیک بودن ترجیح بدم.
Hope you enjoy them. Smiley face. As Apple has less product variety compared to other laptop brands,
باقی شرکت‌های ساخت و طراحی لپتاپ‌ها تنوع محصولی کمتری داره.
their circuits can be analyzed easier,
محصولات رو آنالیز کرد.
and realize that they are not very different in terms of designing.
کلیت طراحی نداره.
So according to this point, I'll use one product schematic in the first video to tell you general things about schematic and how to use it.
کلیات شماتیک و نحوه استفاده از اون رو بگم.
Also show you how to work with board view. And in the next videos, I'll completely analyze parts of circuits. As I said, I'll explain through schematic. Apple MacBook Air, A1466. And motherboard model is 823-209A. Because it has almost all blocks on the schematic. So I should mention that the blocks I'll talk about in this video might not exist on all schematics. For example, block diagram might be in one schematic of a device, meaning this part, while it doesn't exist in another one. So I chose this device as it includes all blocks. The software I use for reading PDF files is Foxit Reader software, which is free and I can easily work with it. Also, it has a more user-friendly search environment. First, let me give some information for those who start from the beginning. What is schematic? Schematic is like a city map, in which every single small detail is drawn there: alleys, streets, traffic signs. All stores, houses, organizations, or even sunshades. In schematics you can see how each circuit works with other circuits, and how they communicate with each other. For example, how the device's battery connects to the device, and how they communicate. Schematic files of MacBook devices include pages such as table of contents, system block diagram, BOM configuration, which I'll explain from the first page, which as you see as table of contents page. This table is called paging, which shows you how to find each part on the pages. It also shows when this schematic file is made or updated. I need to mention an important note. You might have noticed that outer sides of all the pages are divided by lines, which are specified by numbers or letters. What are these parts? These divisions are for finding the exact location of the components. Let's find the exact location of a component in this schematic. For example, C2602. It's on page 24, D7, which means you can find C2602 capacitor in D7 part of page 24.
C2602 هست رو پیدا کنیم.
So it's divided for that purpose.
تقسیم بندی شده.
And it makes it easier to give addresses in schematic.
ما رو توی آدرس‌دهی تو شماتیک راحت‌تر می‌کنه.
The next page that might not be available in all schematics,
تمام شماتیک‌ها موجود نباشه.
but is a very important one as block diagram page.
صفحه بلوک دیاگرامه.
It shows us from what components and circuits the device is made of,
این سیستم از چه اجزایی تشکیل شده.
and how they communicate with each other.
چگونه با یکدیگر ارتباط برقرار.
In other words, it's a map that shows the communication of different components. For example, as you see on the schematic, the CPU of this device is Intel Ivy Bridge, or you can see that the screen gets its data from CPU directly.
صفحه نمایش ما اطلاعاتشو مستقیما از CPU میگیره.
Or you can realize the device has two DDR3 RAM slots.
دو اسلات رم از نوع DDR3 هستش.
Which has direct connections with CPU. In block diagram, you can see that, on which page each component is analyzed. And the page of each component is written under it. And you can see the connections. For example, as you see, CPU communicates with PCH in two ways, which are FDI and DMI. But I should say that the pages mentioned under each component on block diagram might be inaccurate, because the pages gets corrected when the schematic files are updated. And it's better to check the first page to find the page related to each component. Now let's talk about communications. It is different among different components, and it has different types. I can analogize it like this. Some speak English, some speak Persian, some speak Turkish. I'll tell you some of these communications. I'll explain them and their differences in details later. I only want to say that they are only a type of communication, and there is nothing to worry about. Some of them work with 2 wires, some with 8 wires, and that's how they communicate and transfer data with each other. DMI, FDI, PCI, PCIe, SPI, LPC, SATA, USB, I2C, SMBUS. All of them are abbreviations of the names in front of them. For example, DMI is Direct Media Interface, or SMBUS is System Management Bus. And they are different types of communications among different components. I've mentioned them now, because for example if I2C is written on a line, it means that the line uses that communication and there is nothing else. There are other things you can realize from block diagram as well. One of them is, how many USB ports does this system have? Or how does each block connect to other blocks? As you see, fan is controlled by SMC. And SMC is connected to PCH by serial port. What is SMC? SMC is System Management Control that has an important duty, such as detecting pressing power key, keyboard backlight, controlling laptop board LED lights, detecting opening, closing laptop lid, managing battery charge discharge,
و دیشارژ بطری،
managing devices' heat,
حرارت دستگاه،
controlling thermal sensors and fan in general.
کنترل سنسورهای حرارتی و فن دستگاه رو به عهده داره.
It receives data through different sensors of the device.
که دریافت اطلاعات رو از سنسور مختلف دستگاه انجام
Sensors such as SMC, light evaluation,
سنسور حرکت و لرزش، سنجش نور و غیره،
and performs its duties.
وظایف خودش رو انجام میده.
So we conclude that SMC is one of the most important parts of MacBook board,
مهمترین قسمت‌های بورد مکبوکه
and it communicates with PCH or other chips through I2C and SMB US interfaces.
اسمباس با PCHMO یا چیپ‌های دیگه در ارتباط.
I should say that I'll fully analyze this block in the next videos.
در ویدیوهای دیگه به طور کامل میپردازیم.
But in this video I'm just giving a brief explanation.
خدمتتون خواهم.
As you see, SD card, trackpad, Bluetooth are connected to PCH USB port by USB hub.
USB PCHMO متصل شده.
And they work with USB interface.
رابط USB کار میکنن.
This device has a mainboard,
بورد ما یک بورد اصلی داریم. در این دستگاه ما یک بورد اصلی
and a small mini board,
بورد کوچک
which are connected to each other with a connector.
از طریق یک کانکتور به هم متصل شدن.
And the components of a mini board are shown as well,
هم نمایش
such as Hall sensor, which is the proximity magnetic sensor,
که همون سنسور مغناطیسی مجاورته.
and its duty is to detect closing laptop lid.
درب لپتاپ
As you see, it is connected to SMC.
به SMC ما متصله.
And camera connector, a USB port,
و یه پورت USB
and audio IC are on the mini board.
روی این مینی بورد قرار
And you can see how the rest of the components on the block diagram
قرار داره. به همین ترتیب میشه تشخیص داد که
communicate with other components or chipsets.
چیپست‌های ما یا با قطعات دیگه ارتباط دارن.
I should say that this is the general view of the communications.
نمای کلی ارتباطات.
And you can see details of each component in its own page.
مورد نظر هر قطعه مورد بررسی قرار داد.
Let's check page 3.
برای بررسی صفحه سوم
I can almost say that it is the most practical page for laptop repairmen,
برای تعمیرکار لپتاپ
which shows how each voltage is generated.
ولتاژ رو نمایش
But it is unfortunately not available on some schematics.
در بعضی از شماتیک‌ها موجود نیست.
But as general structure of this part is the same in all devices,
در تمام دستگاه تقریبا مشابه هم است.
we can generalize it to all of the devices. You only need to find a schematic that has this page,
یک شماتیک این بخش رو مورد بررسی قرار بدیم.
and then you need to analyze it.
شماتیکش وجود داشته
And after fully comprehending this part, repairing a MacBook device is going to be easy for you. The problems can be divided into two categories in repairing laptops.
دو دسته تقسیم
Problems related to power voltages of different components, and problems of data or signals, and the data transferred between them,
که بینشون رد و بدل میشه.
which I'll talk about in other parts.
دیگه به طور کامل بحث خواهیم کرد.
For fully understanding different circuits' power voltages in MacBook,
قسمت تغذیه مدارس مختلف در لپتاپ
you should have a complete understanding of this page of schematic.
داشته باشید.
Before starting to talk about this part,
این قسمت رو شروع کنم
it's necessary to talk about the information that exists on this page.
موجود در این قسمت بدم.
The first thing is the different states of a device.
وضعیت‌های، مختلف یک دستگاه
For example, the device is shut down, run or standby,
یا در حالت روشن قرار داره یا
or each of these states is specified with a specific mark,
با یک علامت مشخص
as you see in the table,
تو این جدول مشاهده می‌کنیم.
which is known as SPS.
SPS معروفه System Power States.
MacBook devices usually divide into 8 parts.
غالباً به 8 قسمت تقسیم میشن.
G3H and S5 are for times that the device is shut down,
به طور کامل خاموشه
as you see,
که مشاهده می‌فرمایید.
or G3S is the state that is a passage from shutdown to run.
که حالت گذر از حالت خاموش به روشنه.
This state can only be seen in some of the devices,
بعضی از دستگاه قابل مشاهده
and it's not something general.
چندانی نداره.
S4 state is standby,
S4 که وضعیت استاندارد
and S1 to S3.
S1 و S3 S1 تا S3 در واقع
Or when the device is asleep.
دستگاه در حالت اسلیپ قرار داره
And at the end, S0 state in which the device is running.
که دستگاه به طور کامل روشنه.
When you press power key,
وقتی دستگاه خاموشه
while a device is shut down, these states start changing towards S0.
به سمت S0 شروع به تغییر میکنه.
At first, the device is in S5 or G3H state,
وضعیت S5 یا G3H
and then they start changing towards S0.
سمت S0 شروع به تغییر میکنه.
What is the usage of these phrases?
اصطلاحات چه کاربردی برآمده؟
As you see, the usage is that.
شما
Let me zoom in on one voltage direction. By reading the written stuff of the directions, you can realize in what time the voltage should be generated. For example, let's check a main voltage, which is PPBUS_G3H. It means that this voltage needs to be present even when the device is shut down. Meaning, it needs to be present in S5 or G3H state. And if this voltage was absent when the device is shut down, it would mean that there is a problem in here. Let me give you another example. PPVCORE_S0_CPU_reg voltage. As you see, S0 is written in here, which means it needs to be present when the device is on. So this voltage won't be present when the device is shut down. If you check other lines, you can realize that, in what times the voltages need to be present or absent. These abbreviations are mostly used for voltages, and its concept might change for signals. Let me give you a simple example. I'll talk about everything in detailed way in future videos, but in this video, I'll talk about them in general and give some examples. For example, PM_SLP_S4 means that it is the passage signal of the device from S4 state towards S3. PM_SLP_S3 is the time that the device passes from S3 state towards S0. And this signal definitely doesn't get generated in S3 state. It only applies to the signals. But for voltages, you can generalize that. The voltages will be generated in the state that is written for them. Next example, PP5V_S0_FET means that this voltage is present in S0 state, and it would be absent before that. The second thing I can tell you about this page is that how to distinguish the main voltages from the signal voltages. What does this mean? It means there are some voltages that provide voltage of a component or a circuit, which are called main voltages. But there are some voltages that play the role of a signal, meaning they command a component to do some particular duties, or they inform other components that main voltages are generated. PP letters are used in the beginning of the names of main voltages. For example, PPBUS_G3H is a main voltage. which provides the voltage of other components.
سایر قطعات تامین.
PP, letters in the beginning of the name of the voltage.
این دو حرف P در ابتدای این نام
Indicate that it is a main voltage.
شد که این ولتاژ اصلی.
And the other thing I want to say is
دیگه که خدمتتون عرض کنم
how to detect the value of a voltage.
شما ولتاژ رو میخواین تشخیص بدین چند ولته.
As you see, PP3V3, what does 3V3 mean? It means 3.3 volts.
ولتاژ 3.3 ولت ما.
So this is how to display voltage value in schematics.
ولتاژ رو در شماتیک به این شکل نمایش میدن.
Or PP5V is 5 volts, which is the main voltage.
که همون ولتاژ اصلی 5 ولت ما است.
But if it is only 1, P,
عرضم به حضور شما که ولی اگه با یه حرف P نشون داده بشه
like P3V3S5 underscore PGOOD,
یعنی
it means it's a signal.
سیگنال
And this one is PGOOD signal,
ماست که
which shows that 3.3 volts is properly generated in S5 state.
ولتاژ 3.3 ولت در وضعیت S5 ما هست.
So this signal shows that
این سیگنال بهمون نشون میده که
if 3.3 volts is generated properly or not.
به درستی تولید شده یا خیر.
If this signal gets pulled up,
سیگنال در اصطلاح پول آپ شد
it means that the IC generated 3.3 volts properly.
3.3 رو تونسته تولید کنه.
So you can easily understand the written stuff on a schematic.
با دونستن این دو نکته
By knowing these two things,
یه نوشته رو متوجه
for example P5VS3 underscore N
5 VS3 underline EN
is an activator signal which commands IC to generate main voltage, 5 volts, in S3 state.
5 ولت اصلی ما رو به IC در وضعیت S3 میده.
As you see,
که مشاهده میکنید.
so we can realize that when the device is shut down, 5 volts won't be present.
ولت ما در زمانی که سیستم خاموش است ما ولتاژ 5 رو نخواهیم داشت.
In other words, 5 volts won't be present in S5 state.
ولتاژ 5 ولت ما در زمان خاموش بودن سیستم یا همان S5 وجود ندارد.
So it will only be generated in S3 to S0 states.
وضعیت S3 تا S0 تولید میشه.
Let me give you another example.
خدمتتون عرض کنم.
PP3V3 underscore S5 underscore reg
5 underline reg
is the main voltage, 3 volts, which will be generated in S5 state.
S5 تولید میشه.
Meaning, this voltage needs to be present even when the device is shut down. Important note, these examples are for the schematic that I'm working on,
این مثال‌ها مربوط به این شماتیکه که ما داریم روش کار
and the voltages names or states might differ in other schematics.
با یک نام دیگه یا در یک مرحله دیگه تولید شه.
So in each schematic, you need to check
شما باید بررسی کنید و ببینید که مثلا
in what state and with what name does each voltage get generated.
و با چه نامی تولید میشه.
I will try to give examples of schematic of other devices in other videos,
مثالایی هم از شماتیک‌های دستگاه دیگه
so you'll understand that they are generally similar,
مسئله یکیه.
and they're not very different from each other.
با هم دیگه نداره. پس با من همراه باشید.
So you somehow know how to read the written stuff on voltage directions.
نحوه خوندن نوشته‌های روی مسیرهای ولتاژ تا حدودی آشنا شدید.
Let's check page 3 now.
صفحه سوم شماتیک بپرسید.
As I said before,
قبلا گفتم
you'll get familiar with how different voltages of this device get generated.
تولید ولتاژهای مختلف در این دستگاه آشنا
As you see, input voltages of adapter enter through this segment.
از آداپتور از این قسمت وارد میشه.
And the voltage is 14.5 volts,
همونطور که مشاهده میکنید 14.5 ولت خواهد بود.
and it passes through a fuse.
عبور میکنه و الی آخر.
I'm not going to analyze this block in this video. I will only talk about the blocks generally, and I will analyze them in the next videos. One of the most valuable differences of designing Apple platforms compared to other platforms, like Asus or Compal, is that they have accurate and diverse test points. Let me show them on this page as an example.
همین صفحه نمایش بخوام بدم به شما
In different blocks that current and voltage are checked,
و جریان نمونه‌گیری
and their
شده و
accuracy is checked,
دقت اون رو چک
which are
میشه.
specified by these circles.
دایره‌ها مشخص میشن.
The A
دایره‌هایی
circles
که
are
داخل اونها A قرار داره
for testing intensity of passing current through the point,
نقاط تست شدت جریان عبوری از اون
and
نقطه
V
است.
circles are the points that voltages are sampled.
V مشخص شده مکانهایی که در اون از ولتاژ نموده قرار داده
And are sent to devices SMC. And if they get confirmed by SMC, the process of generating voltages will be continued.
تولید ولتاژ آغاز میشه.
On this page, you can also see
میتونید مشاهده
what
کنید
voltage does each component generate, and in what state,
ولتاژی رو در چه زمانی داره.
and what are the prerequisites for generating that voltage,
نیازهای وابسته است.
and on what page of the schematic does the component's block diagram exist.
اون قطعه دقیقاً در چه صفحه‌ای از شماتیک قرار داره.
Let's check U7600IC as an example.
U7600 همونطور که مشاهده می‌کنید اگه مورد بررسی قرار بدیم
Some information are written inside this rectangle.
در نظر گرفته شده نوشته
As you see, this IC monitors the process of generating 1.05 volts, and the part number of the IC is ISL 95870.
ISL 95870.
This IC uses main voltage, PPBUS_G3H, for generating the voltage.
جای ما که همون PP bus G3H استفاده میکنه این IC
which occurs in the 15th stage of the process of turning on system.
15 از فرآیند روشن شدن.
This IC turns on by PP5V_S0_CPU_VCCIOS0.
روشن میشه.
And what does PP5V_S0_CPU mean?
ترجمهش میشه
5 volts main voltage,
اصلی 5
which is generated in S0 state,
سیستم تولید میشه.
and it starts working when it receives CPU-VCCIOS0_N command in stage 21,
شروع به فعالیت
and it generates PPCPU-VCCIO_S0_reg in stage 22.
CPU VCCIO S0 رو تولید میکنه.
And after IC tested sample voltage,
تست نمونه ولتاژ تولیدی خود که همون CPU VCCIO S0 رجه
it generates CPU-VCCIOS0_PGOOD command
good رو تولید میکنه
and sends it to SMC.
SMC میفرسته.
And when current is drawn from this voltage,
کشی از این ولتاژ
SMC samples intensity of passing current
شدت جریان عبوری
of R7640 resistor,
R7640
and it monitors and checks if CPU-VCCIOS0_PGOOD voltage is properly generated or not.
شده یا خیر.
I repeat that the analysis of this block is going to be presented as a video. The next block is BOM config, which shows differences of different revisions of the board, and it doesn't have a practical usage in repairing. The only usage of this block is the list of programmable components of the board. As you see, U3690, U4900 and U6100 ICs are on the list of this board. As sometimes programming some components needs to be performed, you can realize what components are programmable through this list. The next part is function test, that shows where to test different signals. And as we use board view for finding different blocks of a board, this page wouldn't be helpful in repairing either. And the next part I can almost say that this is the most practical page after power diagram. In MacBook Schematics, which is called power aliases, or nicknames of power and signal. Which are shown on 2 pages. A voltage is written differently in different blocks of a schematics, which you'll get to know them on this page. For example, main voltage PPBUS_G3H changes to PPBUS_S0_LCD-BKLT. And as you see, this voltage changes to other name. And depending on the block that a voltage is used, the name of the voltage changes as well. For example, when PPBUS_G3H is used for LCD backlight, it changes into PPBUS_S0_LCD-BKLT. Let's assume you're looking for the generator of PP3V3_S5_VMON voltage. And by checking this page, you can realize that it is the main voltage PP3V3_S5_reg, which has its own generator. You can also see on which pages of the schematic you can find the voltage. For example, PP3V3_S5_VMON is on page 62. And voltages are also categorized on this page. For example, the voltages that are always present, and voltages like 3.3 volts and 5 volts. And on Signal Aliases page, you'll see different names of signals. I should say that you can find signals in different parts of schematic, and you can realize it by searching one signal. Next, parts of schematic are related to connection details, the way voltages get generated, and small components on the board that might differ in each device, but they are similar in general. And that is the process of generating voltages. In a way that you're going to see the main components on the first pages, like CPU, RAM, and how they communicate with other components, and what voltages the components need for working. And by scrolling down and going on to the end of schematic, you'll see how voltages get generated. So I can briefly say that you'll see datas on the first pages, the managing components in the middle of the schematic, and voltage generators at the end. So these were the generalities of schematics. Now let me talk about small details that you can only see on Apple platforms. You can see details of even small components of Apple products on the schematic. For example, in the first line of details of resistors, you can see PCB code. And on the second line, resistance value. The next lines, error percentage, power, type and size. Or for capacitors. On the first line you can see PCB code. On second line, its capacity. And on the next lines, error percentage, working voltage, type and size. Sometimes some components are written on the schematic but not placed on the board. Which are specified by no stuff. For example, as you see, this component is on the schematic. But as no stuff is written, you can realize that it is not placed on the board. But the PCB pad might be on the board, but the component is not placed. As I talked about the written stuff of the voltage names earlier, and you are familiar with reading them, you can see that the voltage values are written under the voltage lines. And even the size of PCB direction of the voltage is accurately written as well. The exact block of some components on the boards are shown on the schematic. But I should say that these are not very practical, because most Apple platforms have board views, and you can easily use them to find specific components or directions. I'll talk about how to use board view in the following. Another thing is that in signal or data directions, they show the input or output signal of components with a pointing in out arrow. So this is how to find out whether it's an input signal or output. For example, this is an input signal as the arrow is pointing in. Input signal of this component, and this is output signal. So these were the generalities of Apple board schematics, and the small details that I haven't mentioned exist on boards of other brands as well. And if you would like to learn more about them, you can check out schematic reading videos of the website, and you can learn more about reading and understanding schematics, so you can refer to them and gain more knowledge. As I said in the beginning of the video, we are preparing the analysis of different blocks of schematics one by one, and we will present them to you. For example, the important block of SMC, charging circuit, will be analyzed in categorized and accurate way, and will be presented to you. So let me tell you a general structure for those tutorials that all use to analyze the concepts. I'll analyze power diagram in the next video. And I'll teach you different parts of block diagram step by step, and analyze its different blocks accurately. And show you how they work. Let's check the board view now. But since this software is used for all platforms, and talking about it will only be repeating what you already know, I won't talk about it so much, and I'll just give you a brief explanation. Board view is a file which shows us where each component is placed on the board, and the directions are also shown. So by the help of a board view, we can see where components are. Or when you want to test a specific signal, you can find the blocks that these signals are available through board view. Another usage of a board view. For example, a direction is sulfated due to water spilling, and it's damaged, and the component is missing. Using the board view, you can see what the missing component is. And what PCB code does that component have? And check the schematic to see what component it is.
ببینین چه قطعه‌ای بوده.
And you can easily find the alternative direction for the damaged one.
مسیر جایگزین و یا قطعه رو پیدا کنید و تعویض کنید.
I use Board Viewer software to open Board View files.
بورد ویو هم از نرم افزار بورد ویور استفاده میکنم.
Because it supports almost all formats of Board View files.
تمام فرمت‌های مختلف فایل‌های بورد ویو ساپورت میکنه.
And it has a simple and more user-friendly environment.
پسندتر و روونتری داره.
Let me explain about different parts of Board Viewer software.
نرم افزار بورد ویور رو بهتون مختصر توضیح میدم.
You can view or check the board view in your desired way.
بورد شما طبق این عکس روبوتون قرار گرفته باشه که مشکلی
Using right and left rotate and horizontal and vertical options.
بورد رو بچرخونید یا قرینه کنید یا هر چیز دیگه از این فلش ها میشه استفاده
For example, click on View.
همچنین از قسمت View
Flip board horizontally, vertically, and flip the board horizontally or vertically.
اساس محور افقی عمودی برای شما قرینه میکنه.
And top, bottom,
قسمت بعدی تاپ و باتومه که
which shows two sides of the board, top of the board and bottom of the board.
زیر بورد
And these are zoom and some simple stuff
زوم و
that don't need explanation.
توضیح نداره.
The only important part in Board Viewer is the next thing that I'm going to talk about,
توی نرم افزار بورد ویور
which is parts. If you want to find a specific component, you need to select it on this list,
از این قسمت قطعه رو انتخاب میکنین.
and the software will show you where it is.
برای شما روی بورد محل قرار گرفتن اون قطعه رو نشون میده.
And if you click on the component, you can see its pins on the right side of the page.
قسمت تب پارت
In this case, there are two pins.
یعنی تعداد پایه‌های اون قطعه رو
You can
می‌بینید
also
و
see where the
هر
pins are
پایه
connected to.
به کدوم قسمت وصل شده رو مشخص
For
می‌کنید.
example,
پایه
pin 2
دو
is GND, and the other pin is connected to SATAMUX_N_L. And to see to which components that pin is connected to on the board,
این به چه پایه‌هایی از قطعات دیگه متصل هست.
you need to click on the pin
قسمت وقتی روی اون پایه کلیک می‌کنید
and go to the upper tab, Net.
که کلیک بفرمایید.
You can see that the pin is connected to this IC on the other side of the board, which is U4510, and you can check it on the schematic
توی شماتیک مورد بررسی قرار بدین که
and see what the pin is and what its duty is. So as I said,
همونطور که عرض کردم خدمتتون
if a component is missing from a board or a direction is sulfated,
شده باشه یا محلی سولفاته شده باشه
you need to clean it, and then you can easily see to which pins it was connected
ببینین که به چه پایه‌ای متصل
and what its duty is,
چه کاری انجام میده
and what component it was in general. The rest of the things are not very practical,
زیاد کاربردی هم
such
نیست،
as
مثل
highlight part names,
عکس لایتی که اینجا
and by
گذاشته
clicking
و
on that,
شما با کلیک کردن روی اون
it highlights the
شماره
component's
کارت
PCB
نمبر،
code.
شماره قطعات مختلف رو به صورت شفافتر میتونین ببینین.
Other parts
و،
include options,
قسمت‌های دیگه که میتونین مشاهده کنین قسمت
which are the
options،
settings of the software,
تنظیمات نرم افزار است،
language,
زبان سیستم
and remember Windows position.
Windows position که
That remembers how you checked the board view the last time you used it.
این بورد ویو رو در چه حالتی مشاهده کردین.
In software,
شما
options,
تو قسمت تنظیمات نرم افزار
you can see that.
می‌تونین مشاهده بکنین
What
که
formats
چه
can this software
فرمت‌هایی
choose and
نرم
open?
افزار، انتخاب کنین و چه فرمت‌هایی با چه فرمت‌هایی باز کنه این نرم افزار رو.
So you don't need to open file when you run the software.
فایل رو اوپن کنین.
And by
همون
double-clicking on the board view files that have
بورد ویو
these
که
extensions,
با این پسوندها هست، اگه روش دوباره
the
کلیک کنین،
software
نرم
opens
افزار
them.
به صورت اتوماتیک باز میشه.
So the board viewer
و
software has nothing
هیچ
special left,
خاصیتی نداره نرم افزار بورد ویور.
and the only
و
practical
فقط
parts are
نکته
part and net,
کاربردیش همین قسمت پارت و نت
which shows you the
شما
specifications of components
قطعه و
and how they get
نحوه
connected to other
اتصال
blocks of
با قسمت‌های
boards.
دیگه بورد رو به شما نشون میده.
So this was how to work with
نحوه
board viewer
کار با
software,
نرم افزار بورد ویور بود.
and a brief
و یه توضیح
explanation.
مختصری که خدمتتون دادم.
One thing that I forgot to mention in the beginning of the video is that
خدمتتون عرض کنم اینه که
Apple laptops can be divided into two categories.
دو دسته
The first category is the ones with magnetic chargers,
شارژر اونا مگنتیه،
meaning they have magnetic adapter cable heads.
آهن روباییه.
And the second category is the laptops that use USB Type-C for charging laptops,
شارژ دستگاه استفاده
meaning
میشه.
the adapter head is USB Type-C,
شارژر آداپتور اونا USB Type-C هستش.
and they are newer devices,
نسبتاً دستگاه جدیدتری هستن.
as their charging circuits are completely different from magnetic ones.
اونا کاملاً با آداپتوری‌های مگنتی متفاوته.
I'll analyze laptops with magnetic adapters first.
تحلیل و بررسی که انجام میدیم مربوط به دستگاه که آداپتورشون مگنتی هستن می‌پردازیم.
And after completing that, I'll analyze laptops with USB Type-C adapters. So all the things I've said in this video is related to the devices with magnetic adapters. And later I'll talk about devices with USB Type-C adapters.
آداپتوری که تایپ C دارن. دسته دوم بعد از کامل کردن این قسمت مورد بررسی قرار میده.
This was the introductory video which I hope you liked. Thanks for watching, smiley face.